Hello, it is my honor and privilege to be here to deliver the McClendon lecture to you all this year. I'm happy to be doing it. I'm happy to have you all with me so we can discuss these ideas and others besides as we go forward. So thank you for being here. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce the lectures right now, which are titled Inhabiting the City, Envisioning Baptist Ways of Doing Theology Amidst Pluralism. We live in a time of great unrest. Of course, people throughout history have believed the same thing about their own eras, and yet I do not think we are unwarranted in believing that this moment is in fact uniquely tumultuous. Global capitalism continues to reshape cities, pushing and pulling people around the world in search of a somewhat sustainable existence. These migrations force interactions between people within Western cities, and while some communities attempt to practice hospitalities in whatever ways they can, others view new immigrant populations with fear and resentment, feelings that are often exacerbated by their own sense of economic precarity. Climate change promises only to accelerate these already troubling trends. In the face of such daunting challenges and others besides, many gravitate towards conspiracy theories that provide a hermeneutical key for unlocking the hidden secrets behind these complex and interlocking phenomena. Others embrace nationalistic and authoritarian political movements that promise to restore forgotten greatness, strength, and to rid countries of undesirables, to restore order. Whereas in the area just past, one could perhaps get away with believing that diversity would inevitably, by some magical alchemy, transform people into loving and tolerant citizens of the world. Today, one should be painfully aware that people can recognize the reality of pluralism and shudder. Needless to say, Christians have had a variety of responses to this situation, supportive of and resistant to authoritarian politics, critical of and trading in conspiratorial thinking. Some Christians attempt to remain neutral on any political issue, positioning themselves as outside or above such partisan or divisive debates. Others push this kind of thinking even further, reminding us that our focus should be on matters of the Spirit. Jesus' kingdom is not of this world, they remind us, rather than earthly things, which are at best of secondary importance, and anyway are addressed best by focusing on heaven, not earth. I must admit to finding such sentiments deeply misguided and unsuited for the world Christians are called to inhabit, for a time that I do not hesitate to call a kairos moment. Indeed, my thoughts on this subject are well expressed by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who sought to redescribe the task of theology for a society that faced its own set of unprecedented political and theological challenges. Writing from prison, Bonhoeffer straightforwardly noted the inadequacy of popular responses to authoritarianism, fascism, and Ehrenvolk ideology more broadly, which included reclamations of reasonability, or turns to ethical fanaticism, or appeals to conscience, or duty, or freedom, or private virtue as panaceas to such ills. For Bonhoeffer, each response crashed against the rocks of what he termed stupidity, which could not be overcome by protests or force, nor instruction or rational argumentation, for the stupid rarely recognize themselves as such. Bonhoeffer saw that each response failed to recognize that, quote, in the great majority of cases, inward liberation must be preceded by outward liberation. That is, before personal individual change can occur, there must be a change in the society within which individual agency is expressed. Under these circumstances, Bonhoeffer notes, the question for the church is whether we will be of any use in bringing about such changes, or whether we will sigh and resign ourselves to ineffectiveness. I happen to agree with Bonhoeffer that in a situation like his and ours, the idea that one could play both sides, avoid taking stands, or address deep structural evil simply by reasoning it out with other people, or focusing solely on the world to come, is a fool's errand. That move often collapses into false neutrality and acquiescence to evil. I also agree with Bonhoeffer that the goal for Christians must be instead to seek to act with responsibility and obedience to the concrete question and call of God in this time and in this place. As such, these thoughts from Bonhoeffer bleed into my task today to introduce a Baptist way of doing theology that is of use in a pluralistic world. In a time when previous visions of goodness, theological paradigms, and political setups are failing, part of the theological task must include articulating a vision that can help guide people, Christian and otherwise, into an uncertain future. Now, while he's not perfect, no theologian is, I believe there are some important resources for developing this theological approach in the writings of James William McClendon, Jr., who is popularly associated with the post-liberal turn in theology with its reclamation of the importance of narrative and practices in understanding distinctively Christian ways of speaking in and about the world. I've elsewhere argued that McClendon shares much with post-liberalism while remaining distinct in important ways, and so today I want to take for granted McClendon's commitment to narrative theology, his interest in Christians living into their convictions in public without translating them into another idiom, and his work on powerful practices. Instead, I want to draw attention to other equally important aspects of his theology, which I hope to show is not a balkanizing or fideistic force, and in fact can directly challenge such tendencies among Baptists writ large. I'll argue that Baptist theology is best done as Christians live and move in the city, emerging out of the social world of overlapping convictional communities where Christians share much with neighbors and strangers alike. To this end, I will explore two themes from McClendon's theology that help articulate a Baptist way of moving within pluralistic urban settings. One, the way his affirmation of the deep commonalities that exist between people couples with a rejection of hyper-individualistic conceptions of conversion. And two, his articulation of a cruciform sense of power that can guide Christians in discerning which narratives within the life of the city we ought to listen to and which we should resist. The first set of resources suggests a type of engagement that is neither unidirectional nor inherently antagonistic. The second, a theological conviction that colors the form this engagement should and should not take.